Bruchim Habayim, welcome to another episode of Taste of Torah. And also, I want to wish you a Chag Sameach, a happy holiday on this Pesach. So let's begin with Pesach, talk ever so slightly about Tzav, and then come back to Pesach. So let's begin with this morning. This morning, I was working the Texas Motor Speedway and assisting, and I was in one of the tents as the cars were parading through. And sometime around 10 o'clock or so, I got a break and I got to step away, and I walked out, and there I was on a tarmac that spread out almost to the horizon, standing next to a towering giant motor speedway. And I was surrounded by hundreds of cars going in procession. And yet, it felt like spring. The sun was shining gently, the temperature was rising, there was a gentle breeze, and in the air, the smell of macaroons. That's right. Pesach is about to come upon us. So let me begin by just making an interesting observation, or at least I think it's an interesting observation, about why Pesach happens when it happens. Ever since I found myself in the position where people will ask me questions, and the question has been asked, why, if we are so fascinated astronomically, we Jews, to the patterns of the skies, and we use that to determine how we observe and practice our calendar here on Earth, why is it that we don't make use of the spring equinox? The spring equinox is observable. It's a certain point in the rotation of the Earth around the sun, and it would seem somehow intuitively logical that the holiday of Pesach, our spring holiday, should fall on the spring equinox. Why not? Now, up to this point, I've given a quasi-scientific answer, and that being that even though we are well aware of the movements of the sun around the Earth and we adjust our calendar according to it, our calendar remains lunar-centric. So we're much more interested in the phases of the moon for marking holidays than we are for the Earth's rotation around the sun. So what we're going to look for is a full moon. And as it happens, the 15th of Nisan, in the month of Nisan, begins with the new moon, ends with the new moon, and around the 15th, we get a full moon, right? And as a result of that, that's the easy cue that Jews use to know that there's probably a holiday around here somewhere. And in this particular case, of course, the holiday of Passover, the holiday of Pesach, which is always been, to my mind, a perfectly adequate answer. However, I heard a charming, somewhat more emotional answer that I think is actually quite useful. And that is that there's a difference between the first day of spring and a spring day, right? That the first day of spring actually happens at a time when, in many places around the world, it still feels rather, or at least in the Northern Hemisphere, it feels very wintry. And in fact, what happens is that the holiday of Pesach doesn't fall during a time when the earth still seems to be dormant or slumbering or subject to the severest forces of the cold. It happens at a time when life feels like it's being renewed, when the earth feels like it's reviving, when we come out of our hibernation and we feel like we are free to go about in the outside world. And so I think it just has an emotional logic that the holiday should fall sometime in mid-spring when it's obvious that things are getting better and improving and we are ready to go out and renew our lives. So that's a good answer. All right. So Tzav. Let me tell you quickly what's going on in Tzav, and I'll tell you why I'm not talking about it today. Tzav is the second of our Torah portions in the book of Leviticus. And what it basically does is it follows up on what was going on in Vayikra. What was going on in Vayikra? A description of our offerings, of the material and sacrificial offerings our ancestors used to do. So that continues on over into Tzav, and when you're done with that, we're talking about priests, the clothing they wear, and the rituals they enact, and the privileges they enjoy. Far be it from me as a rabbi to tell you that there are less exciting Torah portions. There are not less exciting Torah portions. Nevertheless, the truth of the matter is, when it comes to Tzav, it's a little bit of a challenge. There are maybe three major, four perhaps, good homiletic lessons that a modern who is not currently practicing, animal offerings can learn from this Torah portion. So we'll tend to come back again and again to the same themes and the same ideas and the same teachings. But whether it's by an act of divine providence or whether it's an act of careful human planning, it also happens to be the case that Tzav always serves as the Shabbat just before Pesach. And the rabbis in their wisdom designated the Shabbat before Pesach Shabbat HaGadol, the great Shabbat, the magnificent Shabbat, the expansive Shabbat. Why? Because the rabbis and the sages of ancient times told us this is the time when rabbis and sages and teachers should take time to explain Pesach to their community so that they can implement it correctly. All right, so Shabbat HaGadol is called the Great Pesach because that's when rabbis are given free rein to talk as much as they want. But in any case, what will happen, and does happen in Jewish communities around the world, is that rabbis will talk about Pesach and about its observance. Particularly in Orthodox communities, the rabbis will take time to give meticulous instructions on the halakha and minhagim, the laws and customs of how to practice this holiday. People can ask questions about how to kosher their kitchen, or whether water is kosher, or any of the number of questions that they could ask about Pesach. In liberal congregations, we tend to zero in on the values of Pesach. What does Pesach come to teach us? And I have to admit, that's pretty much what I'm doing here. All right, so not to dismiss the educational value of Tzav, but I'm going to talk to you about the holiday. All right, so let's see. I found an interesting little tidbit that I thought was worth talking about. So if you've learned it, great. If you haven't learned it, you may be aware that the idea of four children, having four children at the Seder, and talking about the four children, the wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and the son who does not yet know how to ask, is really based on a biblical feature, which is that it's four times in the Torah that God tells us that we need to instruct our sons. It is specifically sons in the ancient world, but we could say children. All right, so we're supposed to explain to our sons what the holiday is about. And it's said in four different ways. And the rabbis conclude from that, that means that there must be four different educational modalities for different kinds of children. They need to each be taught in a different way. So that's the basis of it. But Rashi, in his wonderful commentaries, zeroes in on this particular one of the four, and that is to say that on that day, you will teach your son that it is because of this that God liberated me from Egypt. All right. So the curious thing about that is the that and the this, the pronomial features, the fact that it doesn't specify what day specifically or what is the reason. All right. It's zeh. this and that. All right. Now, that is pretty self-evident. Even if you are minimalist in the way you read the Bible, that day is clearly referring to the day of our liberation, the first day of Passover. All right. On the other hand, for the sake of this, is much more ambiguous. For the sake of this, God freed me from Egypt. All right. What is the this? Now, Rashi steps into the ambiguity and he says this is the observances of Passover, the mitzvot, specifically the bitter herbs, the roasted lamb, the retelling of the story, the unleavened bread. All right, that's a very, very reasonable supposition that it is the observance of these commandments that is the reason that God brought us out. So Passover itself is the reason that we are telling our sons. However, what Rashi is doing, in effect, is saying, you know what, we can't fix upon the zeh. We don't know what this is precisely. I say it's this thing, but Rashi opens the door to the rest of us saying, well, this refers to something else. So what else could zeh be? What was God's purpose in bringing us out of the land of Egypt? There must be a purpose to it, all right, for the sake of this. Well, this could be any number of things. Of course, we in the modern era very much identify with the idea of freedom. So the idea that God brings freedom into the world as a principle, as a value that God loves, is a perfectly good zeh. You know, God did this for the purpose of establishing the value of freedom. Or he did this in order, he did that for the sake of the Jewish people, to create a holy, dedicated people to him. That's a perfectly good zeh, right? And maybe they're both true. On the other hand, we can also, it opens the door to us to determine that we can offer our own zeh. We can say, this is the reason that he liberated from us from Egypt. And all kinds of answers then arise from that, right? In order that the world should witness the miracles that God can perform, is the zeh. Or in order that he can fill up the rental property in the land of Israel. He's not happy with the current residents. He wants to move them out, and he needs to move in some new, more suitable renters. And so he's doing that. That's a little exotic, but I'm having fun with it. So we actually have permission to say, what is this? What is the this? And insert our own ideas. And as I said, in the modern world, the idea of freedom, the idea of ethical responsibility, the idea of governments and leaders being morally responsible for the people under their control, all are very good answers. And that could be the zeh. This year, however, specifically, I really think there is a special zeh. And the zeh is zeh zaman cherutenu, which is a traditional phrase. This is the time of our liberation. And of course, every year Passover is the time of our liberation. But given the remarkable year we've had in the past year, the fact that we are now coming to the end of this time where we have been forced into our houses in a protracted Passover, waiting for the destroyer, the angel of death, to pass over our houses, I think is just leaps out at me and says, zeh, this is it. So what is this here, that we get to leave our houses after a year? No, I think the zeh is, look at what we did. Now, it's been awkward, it's been anxious, it's been angry, it's been contentious, but look at what we did. For 1 year, People pulled together, scientists, politicians, economists, financiers, and we worked together to end this plague. And now we are experiencing that conclusion. It's happening. Vaccines have been brought into common use in unprecedented speed. Never in the history of epidemiology has anything been done this quickly, nor has it reached so many people already. And by the time it's done, it will have reached vast swaths of the planet. Amazing, amazing. And it's because across nations and across people, we pulled together to make it possible. Zeh. This is the meaning of this Passover, of this day, to illustrate for us, not just that the Jews should be free, not just that the world should be free, but actually something else, and that is that the world has the ability to solve its problems if we're all willing to put the energy, resources, and time to address it. How many other human problems are there out there that with enough focus, enough attention, enough shared effort, we could solve? We could overcome all these difficulties in our lives. And that, I think, is the special lesson of this day for us this year. All right. So you can certainly insert your own Zeh. The reason you celebrate may be for something slightly different than that. But I just think, given how remarkable the events of the past year have been, that we should celebrate Zeh. We should celebrate this. All right, everybody. I hope to see you at our community second Seder. I'm looking forward to seeing your punams on the screen and celebrating with you. Hopefully, this will be the last time that we have to do it this way. Now, we may add remote community Seder celebrations to our future community celebrations. But the miracle is we're all going to be able to get together again very soon. Revel in the miracle. Take care, everyone.